here with Mike Kaye. We're at MetLife Stadium. The windows are open. It's really loud in here. We're doing the best we can, just like the Eagles did at the end of the season. The Eagles won the NFC East. Didn't think they could do it. All they had to do was get through the Giants in the end of the season. They did that. It was close at first, but they pulled away. They were the better team. They're rolling even though half their team is hurt. It's like the weirdest dichotomy because you want to have momentum going in the postseason, but you also want to be healthy. But we'll get in all the injuries and all that stuff. But the point being, the Eagles won the NFC East. Doug Pederson deserves a lot of credit. Carson Wentz is healthy at the end of the season. He's the all-time passing leader for a single season for the Eagles. This is something to be happy about, even if they stumbled to the finish line.
Oh, is it my turn?
Yeah.
I think this team has proven that they're resilient. I think tonight they proved that they can be a good team regardless of the circumstances. Look, you and I talked about it after the game. This team is super beaten up, and there's going to be teams that want to play them for that reason. That said, they are playing with resolve that, they never panic. It's incredible.
And it's amazing.
And that's dangerous to me. The Seahawks are almost equally banged up. I mean, they still have some
I don't know
losses.
if anyone's almost equally banged up.
Right, well, but they're
other
relatively
teams,
banged up. And I think...
Yeah, I mean, the Seahawks are the team, if you could pick any of the playoff teams, you'd want to play them the most.
Right, especially because you had one bite at the apple, and you probably should have won that game.
Yeah, Carson Wentz doesn't have 3 turnovers or whatever it was.
Yeah, and the Seahawks don't, do that trick play. I think they win that game. Also, worth noting, the reason why I want the Seahawks to be the opponent is because that was the game that you missed this season. Oh, so you'll get another chance.
Yeah, that's when I was covering Giants that week.
Right. So
hey, Giants tonight.
Yeah, there you go. There's symmetry here. Look, the Eagles are 4-0. Yeah, and they've beaten nothing but division opponents. Those are the teams that know you the best. Those are the teams that give you a relatively hard time. I mean, the Giants and the Redskins haven't been it the last couple of years against the Eagles. The Eagles have now won 11 of the last 12 games against the Giants. I'm pretty sure this game not single-handedly, but this pretty much capped Pat Shurmur's career as a head coach.
Yeah, he's done.
But you look at let me list some names of guys that maybe some casual fans have never heard of. Matt Pryor, Deontay Burnett, Rob Davis, Boston Scott, Craig James, Alex Singleton, Anthony Rush, TJ Edwards. All of those guys have contributed in some form or fashion over the last 4 weeks. And I think it speaks to the culture. Oh, Marcus Epps. I think it speaks to the culture. Oh, Crayvon LeBlanc. The list goes on, but I think it speaks to the culture that Doug Pederson has really created here. You can criticize his play calling. You can criticize the way he handles certain injuries. You can criticize some of his members of his staff. But when you really look at what this team's been able to do over the last 3 seasons, not just this season, this is a team that always believes in itself. And whatever messaging he's giving behind the scenes, everyone's bought in.
Yeah, it's funny. It almost seems like this is just going to be the way it is with the team every year, where they have this terrible start where it's like, all right, Doug Pederson needs to figure this out, and then he goes and figures it out. It's kind of like the way the games usually go. It's like he starts slow, then he figures it out by the end. He does that for the full season. You'd wish, for the sake of our coverage, where we could get some blowout wins here and there maybe, or
it'd be nice
for
to
the
go
sake
home.
of their blood pressure, that they could make it easier on themselves. But this is kind of the reality of where the Eagles are at. It's like so hard to even project. They're going to be the underdogs no matter what game they play in the playoffs. No matter who they play, they're going to be the underdogs.
Yeah, Brandon Graham straight up said that. He said people are immediately going to just say that we're
and they should be the underdogs. That's
given the injuries. Yeah,
that's what I mean. And we can get into that in a second. But Doug Pederson, I mean, the stuff he does here, you can be an amazing play caller, and that's not even what this is. Him getting his team to play hard for him in Week 17 when everybody's going down. When you make Boston Scott look like he's Darren Sproles. When you make Deontay Burnett look like a guy that's been here all year when he just joined the team basically the last week, and he only signed a couple weeks ago to the practice squad. for them to be able to do that over and over again, and we'll talk about this later, I think Mike Groh probably has saved his job over the last few weeks. I think that's pretty. Everybody complimented him today. That seemed like it was on purpose. But you can feel pretty good. Like, if they lost today, then we would have been pretty critical of the season and all the things they did wrong and all the personnel moves they made that were wrong and the way they handled certain things. But they came back and they beat the Giants when they needed to beat the Giants, and now it's a new season.
Yeah, and, once you get in the dance, you get in the dance. I think there's a clear path for the Eagles to go on a run. I'm not saying they will. I just think, this team to me, with the way they handle adversity, is scary because they're playing with house money, essentially. This was
They shouldn't be here.
Yeah, they shouldn't be here. This is a terrible division. They have lost so many starters to injuries. There are guys contributing who weren't even on the practice squad 3 weeks ago. Deontay Burnett caught a 41-yard pass. He signed on the practice squad 3 weeks ago.
Point me to the Nelson Aguilar play like that this year.
Well, you look at Greg Ward. Greg Ward's outperformed Nelson Aguilar's first half of the season, really.
In 5 games, yeah.
Yeah, it's, when you look at the way other teams handle adversity, let's look at the Patriots. The Patriots have had some injuries. They can't get wide receivers to produce. Yeah, they've got a 12-4 record. They're going to go into this playoffs as a team without a first-round bye. They've never won a Super Bowl.
They lost the Dolphins this week. They don't have momentum. Brady looks old again.
The Jets fell apart when Sam Darnold wasn't around. The Browns, Freddie Kitchens just got fired because he couldn't handle the personalities in the Cleveland locker room.
Look at the Chargers every year.
The Chargers every year. The Jaguars. There are so many
that can never overcome that stuff.
Right. And this team, with the injuries they have, are probably less talented on paper than all of those teams we just mentioned right now. The amount, well, except for the Jaguars. But, you look at the way that they have kind of bounced back and handled theirs, it's tough to pick against them. And right now, if you say that we'll get into both the possible opponents later, so you get to throw out 5 minutes of this podcast, just a little bit, we'll touch on it. But to me, if they're playing Seattle, I think I'm picking the Eagles right now.
Yeah, me too.
I think
the Eagles are hoping for Seattle. I think.
Yeah, they want another bite of the apple, and I think
San Francisco's a better team than the Seahawks.
Something Malcolm Jenkins said in the locker room really struck me. He goes, "We don't care who we're playing in the next round. Right now, we know that we've won the division, and we've just got to keep doing what we're doing." And I think that that's the key here, is they focused on themselves and what they need to improve. Jim Schwartz has called really good defensive game plans in 3 of the last 4 games. Doug Pederson has been able to utilize guys like Josh Perkins and Richard Rodgers and Boston Scott in major roles. Jordan Howard entered the game for a play, and there was a penalty on it, so it didn't even really even count.
Apparently, he wasn't supposed to actually play today. Unless it was an emergency. Yeah.
Right. He was clearly doing the Jay Ajayi thing. But we should bring up the injuries.
Yeah. So let's get into that now.
Yeah.
They're major. It looked concerning. Mm-hmm. We'll start. Miles Sanders happened first, so we'll bring up him. Brandon Brooks was the other one, just to get that out of the way. Miles Sanders hurt his ankle. He went to the medical tent. Then he left the game, and then he never came back. And then he was quickly declared questionable return. Then he was declared out in the third quarter.
Yeah.
And then Brandon Brooks. If it's an ankle, depending on the level. You're seeing it with Lane Johnson. Clearly, if Lane Johnson could physically do it, he'd be doing it. And he can't play right now. And he might not be able to play next week for all we know.
Yeah.
And we'll also have to talk about Zach Ertz in that regard. But so Miles Sanders, I'm concerned about his availability next week. Brandon Brooks looked like he really hurt himself. He was on the ground for a while. It was his shoulder. He had to get carted off with a shoulder injury, which kind of says a lot.
Yeah.
He had to hold it up. It was his arm was up when he went out on the cart. He looked sad. The guys all went up to him on the cart. He was declared questionable immediately, as soon as he left the field, and then he was declared out. I'd be surprised if those guys played next week, and if the Eagles kept winning, maybe Sanders, I don't know, but that's all speculation. But that's problematic. Zach Ertz, reports came out today that he also lacerated his kidney last week. It doesn't look very good that they let him play after he got hurt. After hearing that, but he probably pushed for that.
Well, they also discovered the last week.
I know, but yeah,
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but the point being, it sounds like he probably won't play again this year unless they make the Super Bowl. Like I said, Lane Johnson, Jalen Mills was kind of everybody just assumed he was going to play, and then it got to the game time and he didn't play.
Mm-hmm.
It was ankle?
Yep.
a lot of ankle injuries at the end of the year.
Ankle and foot injuries.
That's like
year.
a wear and tear type thing. It seems like. I mean, these are all Jalen Mills maybe less than the other guys because I think the corners played okay. They didn't play great today. Played okay.
Yeah.
But like, how do you rank the level of concern you have for those four guys? Lane Johnson, Miles Sanders.
Zach Ertz, and Brandon. Well, five guys:
Brandon
Brooks,
yeah.
and Jalen Mills.
Yeah.
Jalen would probably be the lowest on my totem pole. Miles would be number one. This guy is the most dynamic player on this offense. Zach Ertz is Mr. Dependable, but Miles Sanders is Mr. Explosive.
Mr. Big Play, yeah.
Mr. Big Play. And
Mr. Worldwide even, I don't know.
Whoa. Okay, that was like a Mike joke a little bit.
Yeah, it was. What have you done to me?
I don't know. I mean, look, the Boston TD party was alive and present in this game.
You've been waiting for that.
Yeah, I have. But yeah, Miles is the straw that's going to stir this drink against good teams. And look, Jordan Howard, they might have just kind of been giving him one more week since he just got cleared for contact. Maybe he's a big part of the game plan with Boston Scott next week. I think Boston can do some of the stuff that Miles does. And next week's going to be a ground and pound sort of thing. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game regardless. I think they can get by a week without him. I just, like, if I'm the Eagles, and he can play even at 75%, he can help. From there, I would say Brooks, just because we saw the way they fell apart against the Saints last year when he went out. Matt Pryor's also probably the least experienced of the guys that would fill in for an injured player. I'm not as concerned about Lane because Vaitai had a rough moment in the first half. But, like, outside of that, he's had rough moments in back-to-back games, but they're only one moment.
Yeah.
Overall, he's been fine. Carson Wentz really isn't getting sacked. The pressure isn't always there. They're doing a lot of design rollouts. They're giving help.
Yeah, the Giants had 1 sack total.
Yeah, I mean, look, Zach Ertz is kind of a big deal.
Against good teams, he's a big deal, yes.
Yeah, and I've said it before, I think he might be the most clutch player in Eagles history.
Yeah, and defenses have to account for him. Like that they do. Well, the Giants usually don't.
But if they didn't have Dallas Goedert, they'd be screwed.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely a little, but like it's like everyone has said that because I said the Eagles are in trouble without Zach Ertz in the playoffs, but it's twofold. Like having Dallas Goedert is at its best when you also have Zach Ertz. When Dallas Goedert is your number one option, then you're in trouble. Like I think Dallas Goedert is awesome, but they don't have the other options to where that like is viable.
I was actually really impressed by Josh Perkins today. I thought he, that touchdown catch that he had, and he's getting open relatively often. Look, here's the thing, though. They are probably going to get Nelson. I would assume they would get Nelson Aguilar back maybe in the next couple of weeks. Whatever.
I'm skeptical,
if they beat the Seahawks, they'll get Deshaun Jackson back most likely.
Yeah, even if it's just like a decoy.
I'd imagine Lane Johnson's back either next week or the week after. They've got Jordan Howard back.
They're going to be very hurt next week. So if they can beat the Seahawks, then everything already is gravy at this point. But if you could beat the Seahawks and then you all of a sudden start getting these guys back, they can make some noise.
Well, and consider this. This is an Eagles team that's won 4 straight games. Yeah, they're banged up, but they've won 4 straight games. They're also going home right now.
Yep.
They're feeling themselves something fierce. Carson Wentz was like out here dealing passes that, frankly, were dangerous, but he could make them, and he made them. And whoever they play next week will be coming off an emotional letdown of losing the division, and then they have to travel to the East Coast. So I think, depending on when that game is, I think you can feel pretty good about the Eagles. I'm not saying they would beat the 49ers. I think they have a shot if they're playing the 49ers. I think this team can beat any team outside of the Saints right now. They have a shot.
I think the Niners are a tough matchup, but yeah, they can.
Yeah, they are, but I mean, if you're in the playoffs, you're going to be, you know what I mean? So, I'm just telling you, teams can't take this Eagles team lightly, and I think that if you're an Eagles fan, you really should appreciate that because they have a way of having guys step up like organically when they need to. Like Matt Pryor stepped in, the chemistry on the offensive line didn't even just, it wasn't like a thing. It was like Brandon Brooks never left, which says something because Brandon Brooks is easily the best offensive lineman on this line to play tonight. I mean, I think Lane Johnson gave him a run for his money, but yeah, I mean, I can't say enough positive things about the way Doug Pederson has kept this group together.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the game itself. Carson Wentz, he had a pretty good game. 23 of 40, 289, 1 touchdown. Like I mentioned, he got first 4,000-yard season in Eagles history, which is good.
Yeah, that's pretty okay.
The throw he had to Josh Perkins was pretty ridiculous.
Threw it across his body. Yeah.
Another one, when you get Carson Wentz out of the pocket, like, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and they weren't really doing that enough in the first half of the season. But like what happened on the play? He rolled out and then he threw it over.
So he rolled out to his right, and then threw to his left with Perkins one-on-one, trusted him to go up and get it, and it was a touchdown. That's what it was. It was a touchdown score.
That's what it was. Josh Perkins getting a touchdown in Week 17 to help the Eagles get to the playoffs is pretty.
I mean, look,
pretty classic 2019 Eagles.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I mean, look at they had 4 touchdown drives. Boston Scott had 3 of them, and Josh Perkins had 1. Just like they wrote it out.
So I'd say. So the first half, the storylines were that touchdown and all the injuries, probably.
Sure.
The weather was a factor, so they were all, the Eagles went for a 4th and 7 instead of doing a 56-yard field goal.
I thought it was 4th and 5.
I think it was 4th and 7.
Oh, okay.
Either way, it was 4th and mid to long.
And he's so ballsy, that Doug Pederson.
And they didn't get it. But so then the second half comes. The Giants score. It's 10-10. Eagles score again, and then Saquon Barkley immediately gets a 68-yard run where you're starting to feel like, uh-oh. And that's kind of like where Carson Wentz even admitted that was a turning point. That's kind of where they buckled down. Like, where was your headspace after Saquon ran for that touchdown?
I wanted to see what they would do on the next drive. And what they did on the next, right? The next drive was the field goal drive.
62 yards.
Yeah.
Boston Scott touchdown.
Like, that's the thing with me, too, is like, just gut feeling. Like, I came into this game. I think you and I talked about it beforehand. We were like, they're going to lose.
Yeah. Well, because you start hearing all the injuries and all that stuff.
Yeah, and it was just like, maybe they're not luck, but maybe their goodwill tour had kind of, every now and then you're due a loss, right? And so, yeah, you get kind of that feeling, it didn't start to rain yet, which was interesting. And then as we got into the game, I don't think at any point in the game I thought they were going to lose. As a matter of fact, I didn't start writing my game forwarding story, I think, till like 4 minutes left in the game. So
yeah, because you got to adjust a little bit.
Yeah.
Kind of happens sometimes. But so they bounced right back from that. I guess we should talk about Boston Scott a little bit.
Oh, you think?
I mean, so he had 19 carries, 54 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 catches, team high 84 receiving yards. Even more than, because we talked about Greg Ward a lot over the last few weeks. Boston Scott, they've uncovered something here, it seems like.
Oh, for sure. I think Boston.
I don't know if this was Joe Douglas last year who found him on the Saints practice squad or who thought it was a good idea to add him, but it's really worked out.
Yeah, I would say. I think for this Eagles team, he's he and Greg Ward are kind of like the scrappy guys that have shown you can find talent on the practice squad and find contributors. They're also guys who are really hard on themselves. They don't really take anything for granted. And I think when you play like you've been through a lot of adversity in your career, and this could be your last carry, which is how Boston Scott runs. Boston Scott runs
hard, yeah.
Every snap could be his last. And I think he's kind of inspired some guys on the team. I think Greg Ward's inspired some guys on the team, and rightfully so. These guys are playing like there's no tomorrow, and that's the exact mindset Doug Pederson, Jason Peters, Brandon Graham, and a bunch of other veterans have subscribed to, and guys are following along.
I mean, and the best part of all of that is the Eagles now, and Greg Ward and Boston Scott and some of these other guys, they have these young guys under contract next year for super cheap. So they finally have some young talent they can hang their hat on a little. These guys aren't stars by any stretch, but the fact that you can go into next season with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott, they're here. Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who was also banged up, didn't really play much today, by the way. They're going to be here. It seems like Deontay Burnett might be a player. Robert Davis had a nice catch that was called back because of a hold. I'm not saying all these guys are going to be here next year or anything, but there's something to the youth being the reason why they're playing well, as opposed to them relying on Jordan Matthews for the 40th time.
Yeah, I mean,
and Andrew Sendejo and guys like that.
You say that. I spoke to Richard Rodgers, who they brought back, and
that was like, hey, we
just need you.
You up?
Yeah.
Send him a you up text, and
I just think the the 53-man roster ecosystem that they've built is that they're going to reward guys who are with them from the jump. You know what I mean? They're going to and there's, 7 guys that have been raised up from the practice squad? I mean, Richard Rodgers was a guy who was with them in training camp. They've brought guys back because they're good fits for the locker room, and they know it's better to bring up the guy you know than the guy you don't know. And I think these guys have kind of fit into place, and that's really important.
The other huge play that we should mention is the forced fumble.
As my baby monitor for some reason goes off. Sorry about that.
If there wasn't enough noise already in the background, Brent crying is
yeah.
But so when did that happen? That was in the fourth quarter, early on. Fletcher forced it, right?
Well, no. So it was a low snap. Daniel Jones bobbled it, picked it up.
Oh, yeah, Fletcher Cox shoved him out of the way to keep him from getting the ball.
Right.
Actually,
Malcolm Jenkins knocked the ball out once he regained possession, and then Fletcher Cox did his thing.
The defense really stepped up today. So at one point I pointed out that Jim Schwartz was saving the Eagles' season because the defense was just shutting them down while the offense was falling apart because everybody was breaking all their limbs. And then Saquon had that long run. But if you I know the if you remove thing is pretty cliche, but if you remove that one long run, this was a really, really good game. I know Rasul got beat a couple times. He's just not good against fast receivers. That's just reality.
But I thought he played overall pretty. Yeah. It was an okay performance.
The pass rush was working pretty well. I think Derek Barnett had 2 sacks. Brandon Graham had 1. Mm-hmm. He'll end with, 8.5 sacks? That's a pretty good season.
And he forced basically one of Barnett.
Yeah. Because that's why I thought he got that, the second one.
Yeah.
6.5 sacks, I believe, for Barnett, which is solid.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. The fan base was a little quieter about Jim Schwartz today.
Yeah, well, and they should be. Look, I think Jim Schwartz is at worst a top 10 defensive coordinator in the league. And if you're going to fire him, you got to find the right guy. Look, Ron Rivera is going to get a job. He's going to get a head coaching job. It just is what it is. Marvin Lewis is not going to go back to being a defensive coordinator. It's just not going to happen. And look, good defensive coordinators are still in the league because their teams win. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, look, Jim Schwartz has been the defensive coordinator for a team that's gone to the playoffs 3 straight years, won 2 division titles in 3 years. At times when Nick Foles has struggled, Carson Wentz has struggled, there have been a plethora of injuries on both sides of the ball. He's got to have his due. At some point, he's got guys like Crayvon LeBlanc who people left for dead. I remember the podcast when they picked him up, and we were talking about it, and I was praising the heck out of him. I got made fun of by the entire journalist group, or beat group, because it was he's just like a fill-in corner. No, the dude's balling. He had a great night tonight. Yeah. Sidney Jones, a guy that people have left for dead, he had a pick tonight and played well. There's something to be said about this defensive staff. They've had a new cornerback, it seems like, every single game play a major role, and that's a big deal. Most guys would shrink up after the treatment that Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas have received over the last 3 years, being off and on and having bad moments and then being benched and not getting their turn and stuff like that. Corey Udland's got these guys playing they're full-time starters. I just think it's a really impressive feat for this defense specifically. The offense has done well because they have a good offensive line. They've been able to withstand stuff. Jeff Stoutland's maybe one of the top 5 position coaches in the entire league. They've just been able to overcome. You've seen them adjust. Jim Schwartz really isn't adjusting. He's coaching. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So before we talk a little bit about their 2 possible opponents, we don't want to dwell on it too much, just because by the time some people listen to this, that game will be decided. But was there anything from the locker room that you saw? I know they were wearing shirts that said the East is not enough, so clearly they have their eyes on more than just winning the division. It wasn't a crazy celebratory locker room as maybe you would expect, but everybody was pretty happy. Rick Lovato had a funny shirt on about how he loves the haters or something like that.
Yeah.
And in the post-game press conference, so Howard Eskin asked the first question, and he was like, what was the post-game scene like? And he's like, Howard, do you like dancing? I don't know. I couldn't hear what Howard said. He's like, well, it was
I
like that.
I would assume he probably does.
Yeah, it was a lot of dancing. It was great.
Yes, I was told that the song The Box by Roddy Ricch was the song that played when they were in the locker room. If you want to find
Good
that.
info.
Yeah, Greg Ward told me. Your buddy, Greg Ward.
Good guy.
So if you want to look that up on YouTube, I don't know if that has a lot of explicit language. I literally just put it up on
Mike's not endorsing it. He's just
yeah,
saying.
I'm not. As a parent, I understand where you're coming from. If you're listening to this with your child or your wife or your husband or whatever, and you don't really like potty language, I get it, man. I get it.
But so was there anything cool or interesting you heard in the locker room, or?
I'm trying to think back. It was like a whirlwind. I thought Malcolm Jenkins said something interesting where he was asked when they lost to the Dolphins if he saw this coming. He said, yeah, because I knew that it was going to go one or two ways. We were going to tailspin out of the playoffs, or we were going to get our junk together and make a run, and that's what they've done. I think the important message to take away, like, you and I left them for dead. Like,
yeah,
we'll admit it, we left them
absolutely.
for dead. My headline was Dolphins prove why the Eagles don't deserve to be in the playoffs, and at that time they didn't.
They did not deserve it. Yeah.
Now they do. Sort of.
Yeah, relative to the NFC East. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
they're the least bad team in the NFC East.
The least bad team. Okay. Well, that's interesting. A lot of layers. But
Not really, it's pretty simple.
Whatever. Anyway, so I think moving forward, this team's got a lot of confidence. Like, I talked to TJ Edwards about what Jim Schwartz does to prepare the guys, the backups for injuries, and they're always kind of just part of the game plan. They always get these extra reps. I talked to Matt Pryor, who said Jeff Stoutland, even when he was inactive every game last year, or almost every game last year, Stoutland said, hey, you know what? The injuries might not happen this year, but they're going to happen. They're coming. You're eventually going to have to play. And then look at what he did this week. Like, stepped up, played right guard, and did his thing. I just think this team has the right mindset moving forward. They know that they're beaten up. They know they're going to be underdogs. And they play at their best with their backs against the wall. Part of the reason why I was skeptical about this game is they were no longer the underdogs. They were supposed to win this game. They had the division in their hands. There was everything set up for them to have an emotional letdown. And then, bam. But now, they're going to be the underdogs every week. And that's when they play their best football. So, watch out. I think this could be another Bears game where they come in, nobody's expecting them to play well. They hold the score tight, and at the end, crazier stuff happens.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure what's going on with the game right now. It doesn't really matter anyway. But so the 49ers have probably the best defense in the NFL, or the second best. Their defensive line is unreal. Their pass rush. If you don't have Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson, that's scary. They have Emmanuel Sanders, who's probably the best receiver they would face out of those two teams. He's been really good for them. George Kittle is an absolute beast. That he's going to be very difficult to cover if they were to play the 49ers. And offensively, they're the best running team, or they're like second best in rushing offense in the NFL.
That's typical to Shanahan offense.
Yeah, they have three running backs that are really good. They have a good offensive line, and they have Richard Sherman in the secondary who's playing at a Pro Bowl level. So there's less good matchups for the Eagles in that game than the Seahawks, where the Seahawks are a run-heavy team that has no running backs left. They just signed Marshawn Lynch off the street. The receivers, they don't have Josh Gordon anymore. They had him the last time these two teams played.
Yeah, almost decided the final drive with the slant route.
Dwayne Brown is banged up for them. He's one of their offensive linemen, and their offensive line already isn't that good. Their defense has some talent, has Jadeveon Clowney and some other guys, but it's not like you're not as scared of it as the San Francisco one. So we pretty much said this, but Seattle is like the obvious we want that team matchup, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
If you want like a viewing point of when we're doing this podcast, there's 5:54 left in the second quarter, and the 49ers are up 13-0. And Russell Wilson's 3 of 7 for 16 yards.
They're already up 13-0. Wow.
Yeah, and Russell Wilson's 3 of 7 for 16 yards. Marshawn Lynch has 2 carries for 7 yards. They're starting Travis Homer. Listen, boys and girls, if you're an Eagles fan, you want Seattle. Yeah. You want Seattle.
I would say, of anything, though, if there's anything for the Seahawks or against the Seahawks, it'd be that I'm more scared of Russell Wilson than Jimmy Garoppolo.
Sure, I agree with that.
But there's like the stuff around him isn't as good.
Right, and listen, there's going to be holes in this defense. I think Dallas Goedert could have a similarly good game to what Kittle could do. Look, if Carson's going to play like this, oh, wow, George Kittle already has 5 catches for 74 yards, and there's, again, 5:44 left in the second quarter. So you know that you can scheme and game plan a tight end against them. Obviously, Goddard's not as talented as Kittle just yet, or hasn't realized that
Nobody
potential.
Really is,
yeah, he's the best tight end in
Even
the league.
Ertz is probably not as good as him.
Look, I really like the Seattle matchup for the Eagles, and everything's coming up Eagles right now. And look, Doug Pederson, they're going to be unbearable to deal with if they win this Super Bowl. I'm not even going to be able to write anything negative. I'm not. I'm just I'm not, because they'll constantly be like.
There's a report about Brandon Brooks right now. Let me read it. For me and Rappaport, he said, Brandon Brooks, who left today's game in a cart, suffered a dislocated shoulder that was popped back into place. We'll have scans tomorrow to learn the damage, and his status for the weekend is uncertain. So dislocated shoulder.
That's actually a little bit more positive than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I thought he tore his tricep or his pec or something.
Yeah, so relative to what we thought it might be, still don't know if he plays next week, but.
Yeah, if you watch the replay of it,
it's a non-zero chance now, at least.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Zach Ertz, where it's like, hey, you want to stay on the optimistic side, but probably not going to happen.
And lacerated kidney just sounds. Maybe it's not as bad as it sounds.
It's bad.
The word lacerated is not one you want to associate with part of your body.
Well, it's an organ. It's an organ.
It's an organ.
It's not an Oregon duck. It's an organ. But those are 2 separate words.
Wow.
But anyway, what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, Seahawks. If you're an Eagles fan, this already probably happened by the time you're listening to this. Seattle is who you want. You should feel very good about Seattle. And you know what? I really think the Eagles have found some people. You know what's interesting? And we talked about this last year. And you still want to give guys competition and fill out the roster in the offseason, obviously an upgrade. But I think the Eagles have found some players over the last 2 years because of how terrible this plague of injuries has been. Look, Matt Pryor didn't impress me at all during training camp. I was pretty adamant I thought he was not very good. He's been in spot duty against the Seahawks and spot duty against the Giants and played well in both. So he could be a backup, long-term backup. Especially with Brooks suffering injuries and stuff. Look, Greg Ward should be competing for the starting slot job next year. He can be the cheap replacement for Nelson Aguilar. You're still going to draft a guy, but ideally, I think with this offense, you want to have a slot committee, but that's here nor there. But you're going to have to pay Alshon Jeffrey, and you're going to have to probably pay a lot of Deshaun Jackson, so it makes sense. It's logical. You look at the corners. They're probably going to re-sign Jalen Mills, I would think, at this point, but you can say goodbye to Ronald Darby because you've seen in flashes what Crevon LeBlanc and Avonte Maddox and Rasul Douglas and Sidney Jones have done, to the point where if you draft another guy or sign another guy, you kind of feel good about the depth there. Linebacker, TJ Edwards looks really good. He might be the replacement for Nigel Bradham. These guys are getting invaluable experience during a playoff push, and I think that's something that you can also take away with. Even if you don't feel like they can have a long run in the playoffs, there's a lot of positives here. The Eagles aren't going to look at this season as being a success if they lose in the first round of the playoffs. That's just not how they think. But I do think they have to feel very good about their depth for the future. Maybe not their starters, but their depth. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, because these are all guys that ideally they don't have to play these huge roles in the future, but they're capable of doing it, which is what their backups early in the season weren't, it seemed like. So,
can we talk
the starters?
Can we talk a little bit more about Carson Wentz? I know you want to wrap up, but how impressed have you been over this last month with his play?
Very. I think he's changed the narrative around himself single-handedly, even if maybe they shouldn't have been in those close games that he led them in game-winning drives. The fact that he did that was a step up. He's really taken ownership. They've done him mic'd up twice in the last month, which I'm sure was on purpose. And you can just kind of he interacts with every single guy on the team, and it just really seems like they're rallying around him more than they ever have, at least since 2017, where it was a question of why did they only rally for Nick Foles. You'll notice nobody was talking about Nick Foles today because they didn't have to because he's healthy, and Carson Wentz, he had if you look at the pure numbers, he had a very good season. I think that the numbers don't tell the whole story on his season. It was a bumpy one at times, but I think you're going to start hearing the MVP hype again for him going into next year.
I think he needed to get past this hump of playing 16 games. I think he needed to get into the playoffs, and that was important. If he can get a playoff win, I think you're gonna see. You know, there are guys like Matt Stafford who have been to the playoffs, but you wouldn't view them as like a top 5 guy. Phillip Rivers has hovered around the top 5 his entire career, but not really necessarily been like the biggest winner. You know, I think there's some shine off Aaron Rodgers even in recent years because they really haven't had the success that they had early on in his career. Carson's building momentum. The NFL's kind of had like this youth movement at the quarterback position where Mahomes and Deshaun Watson and, other guys. Sorry, off the top of my head, I can't even think about it. But Carson can be part of that group, and I think Carson is part of that group. And like you said, I think he single-handedly changed the narrative. He really has. Like, there's nobody saying Carson Wentz can't be a winner. Carson Wentz isn't a franchise quarterback. At least nobody educated enough on the subject. Some of the throws that he made in this game and that he's made over the last month are crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy, boys. Like,
although I will say, if he goes and throws 3 picks or turns it over 3 times against the Seahawks again, then that noise might get louder again. But he at least silenced it for a little while, which is saying a lot considering how unbearable the first 12 weeks of the season were on radio waves.
Right. And you know what? They've been in playoff mode for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, he's won playoff games, essentially, if you want to consider them that. And I think moving forward, it's something you can build off of. And look, this team's playing with house money, and they're playing without fear or any hesitation. And that's scary if you're a team like the Seahawks, who just lost to the Cardinals at home and are now likely to lose to the 49ers. Like, think about that. That's crazy. You know, if the Seahawks are the team that they draw, the Seahawks are coming off 2 major losses against division opponents, 2 games that they needed to have, and here they are. They're playing an Eagles team that doesn't give an F. I did that for you, Carson, because I know you're probably listening. Like, that's impressive. Like, and that's scary. That's a scary challenge. This team weathers storms, like they did tonight in rain.
They weathered a storm tonight.
Yeah, so to speak.
And we're going to have to brave the storm to get back to the car. I know you guys are really worried for us.
Especially Zack. You know, he's delicate. But
I sat, for a story I have coming out tomorrow, I sat in the stands for the first half, so I was braving the elements way more than you were tonight.
You were.
Yeah.
You'll get no debate from me on that one.
It wasn't fun. Okay, we'll end on that note. Subscribe to Eagles Extra. Leave us some comments, write us some reviews, and now that we're in playoff mode, we're going to be getting you some playoff mode podcast. And
playoff mode podcast.
We're excited for the next week, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Oh, yeah. Send us your questions on Eagles Extra when you get a chance. What are you looking forward to most about this potential playoff run? Obviously, other than the Super Bowl, who's the player you think can be the X factor? Send us your responses. We want to hear from you.
All right. Thanks, guys.